They knew since February. CNN knew. KOLD-TV in Tucson knew. The local news station that received both notes knew and agreed to a request from law enforcement and the Guthrie family to hold off on reporting the contents. The FBI knew. The Pima County Sheriff's Department knew. Savannah Guthrie knew. She stood in front of the camera on February 7th and said, "We received your message and we understand," and the country watched her say it without knowing what the message said. She is buried in nature now. They all knew since February. And they kept it quiet for 145 days, not because they were hiding something from the public, because they were protecting the investigation, because the specific contents of the second note, that the kidnapper admitted Nancy was dead, that she perished shortly after she was taken, that she is buried in nature now, that they are truly sorry, were among the few pieces of information that only the actual perpetrator would know, until a suspect was in custody. Until investigators had someone across the table to ask, "What did the note say?" and watch whether the answer matched. That is why it was kept quiet for 145 days. And that is the most important thing to understand about what the note's public disclosure now means. This is Forensic Disconnect, day 145. And today we are going to cover two things that together define the state of this investigation right now. First, why the FBI and CNN and KOLD held the note's contents for 5 months, what that decision tells us about the investigative strategy, and what releasing it now signals about where the investigation stands. Second, the criminal profiler who says the notes are fake, the former FBI agent who says the language is psychologically revealing, and the specific factual corrections to yesterday's reporting that change how the authentication picture looks. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Day 145. Subscribe. Let's start with why it was held. Because understanding the FBI's decision to ask news organizations to withhold the contents of the second note is essential to understanding what the note actually is and what role it plays in the investigation. CNN's John Miller, the network's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, who has sourcing inside federal law enforcement that produces some of the most reliable reporting on this case, explained the 3 specific reasons the note's contents were kept private. The first reason is verification. When the second note arrived, investigators were still determining whether both notes were authentic and sent by the actual kidnappers. The authentication process takes time, especially when the notes were sent through what law enforcement described to KOLD as the same type of secure server rather than a traceable IP address. You do not disclose the contents of a communication you cannot yet verify as authentic. You sit on it, process it, and wait. The second reason is tip volume. Authorities believed the public interest in Guthrie would wane, and investigators would receive fewer tips if they released information that said she had died. This is a specific investigative calculation about the relationship between public engagement and lead generation. A case where the victim is believed to be alive produces a specific type of public engagement. People looking for a living person, calling in sightings, reporting suspicious activity, contacting the tip line with information that might lead to a rescue. A case where the victim is believed to be dead produces a different type of engagement. The specific concern was that disclosing Nancy's likely death would reduce the specific type of tips that an active search generates. The third reason, and the most important, is interrogation value. If investigators zeroed in on a suspect or suspects, they would be able to question them on the details of the note. If the information in the notes was publicized, it would have compromised one of the few pieces of information only the kidnappers would know. This is the specific evidentiary logic of keeping case-sensitive information out of the public domain. In any interrogation, detectives assess a suspect's knowledge by asking about details that only the perpetrator could know, details that were never publicly disclosed. If the suspect provides those details correctly, they have demonstrated knowledge that is specific to the crime. If the note's contents were public, a suspect could theoretically have learned them from media coverage rather than from direct participation in the crime. The note's contents, "She perished shortly after she was taken, she is buried in nature now, we are truly sorry," were that kind of detail. Only the person who wrote the note would know exactly what it said. And the fact that the note's specific language was kept out of public reporting for 145 days means that any suspect the investigation has spoken to or will speak to who demonstrates specific knowledge of the note's language is demonstrating knowledge that cannot have come from the news. Now let's go to the specific correction to yesterday's authentication reporting, because this matters. Yesterday's reporting, including our own, referenced the same IP address as the first note as the authentication mechanism for the second. This was based on the airmail reporting from Howard Blum and corroborated by several outlets. CNN's reporting today adds a specific and important correction. The two notes in the Guthrie case are believed to be from the same person, but both notes did not come from the same IP address. It appears the sender used the same type of secure server to hide their IP address, the same type of secure server, not the same IP address. This is a meaningful distinction. A secure server, a VPN, a Tor relay, an anonymizing proxy can be used repeatedly to send communications without revealing the sender's actual IP address. If the sender used the same anonymization infrastructure for both notes, investigators can establish that the same anonymization methodology was used without being able to directly trace either note to a specific IP address. This specific detail, same methodology, not same IP, changes the authentication picture in a way that is important to be accurate about. The notes are believed to be from the same person based on the methodology of how they were sent and based on the specific details they contained, including details about what Nancy was wearing that only the perpetrator would know. But the IP address itself was hidden, or at least anonymized through a secure server. This does not eliminate the authentication. It changes its basis. The authentication rests on the specific details the notes contained, the consistent methodology of how they were sent, and the investigative assessment by law enforcement, which CNN confirmed, that both notes were believed to be from the actual kidnappers. That investigative assessment, both notes believed to be from the actual kidnappers, is the specific law enforcement determination that the airmail reporting, the NBC reporting, the CBS reporting, and the CNN reporting all corroborate. The notes are almost certainly real. The authentication mechanism is more complex than a simple IP address match. Now, let's go to the criminal profiler controversy. Because John Kelly, the president of Stock Inc., and a veteran of criminal profiling, told Fox News Digital today something that directly challenges the investigative consensus about the notes' authenticity. He said, "Bottom line is, I don't believe they're real." His specific argument is that the two notes read as if they were written by two different personalities. The first note, the ransom demand, the millions in Bitcoin, the cold transactional demand for money, reads to Kelly as the work of a psychopath. Someone who objectified Nancy, who treated her as a commodity, who engaged in the crime with the specific emotional flatness of someone who does not feel the normal human responses to harming another person. The second note, the "we are truly sorry," the perished, the buried with nature, reads to Kelly as emotional, as human, as someone who feels regret and expresses it. And Kelly says, "This is a person to me that wouldn't know a feeling if they tripped over one." The personality who wrote the first note would not write the second. This is a legitimate forensic linguistics argument, and it raises a specific question that deserves to be taken seriously. Is it possible that the two notes were written by different people within the same criminal operation? That the first, the ransom demand, was written by the cold operational mind of whoever designed the scheme, and the second, the regret, the burial disclosure, was written by someone else who was involved, someone who had more human responses to what had happened. Criminal operations in kidnapping cases sometimes involve multiple people with different roles and different personalities. A mastermind and an executor, a planner and a person who actually carried out the physical crime. The specific personality profiles that Kelly is identifying in the two notes, cold and calculating versus emotional and regretful, are not necessarily two different anonymous people in the public. They could be two different people within the same criminal enterprise. This is consistent with the theory that the Guthrie kidnapping involved at least two people, the porch guy, who executed the physical abduction, and whoever designed and managed the ransom communication infrastructure. The porch guy objectified Nancy. The person managing the communications had more emotional responses to her death. Kelly's skepticism about the note's authenticity is not the same as Kelly saying the kidnapping didn't happen or that the communication was entirely fabricated. It is Kelly saying the two notes appear to reflect two different personalities, which may mean two different authors, rather than a single author who was inconsistent. The FBI's assessment, that both notes are believed to be from the actual kidnappers, does not necessarily contradict Kelly's observation. Both can be true. The notes came from within the criminal operation, and different people within that operation may have contributed to different communications. Now let's go to former FBI agent Ray Carr's analysis, because Carr's assessment of the note's specific language is the forensic linguistics counterpoint to Kelly's skepticism, and the two together give you the fullest available picture of what the note's language actually tells us. Carr focused on the phrase, "not intentional." He said, most individuals, when usually you're looking for truthful disclosures saying what happened, where, when, who was involved, a lot of times the phrase "not intentional" is just a word that suggests awareness of their culpability of what they're doing. Awareness of culpability. The phrase "not intentional," or its equivalent in the second note, the indication that the death was unintentional, is not exculpatory language. It is language that acknowledges that something blameworthy occurred and attempts to mitigate the degree of blame. You only need to say "not intentional" if you understand that the outcome is something you could be blamed for. A person who had nothing to do with Nancy's death would not write "not intentional." A person who had nothing to do with her death would write, "We had nothing to do with her death." The not intentional construction, the acknowledgement that they were involved but did not mean for it to happen, is the linguistic fingerprint of someone whose involvement is acknowledged, whose outcome is acknowledged, and whose specific moral position is, "I was part of this, but I did not want this specific result." Carr's analysis adds to the linguistic picture that the three sentences collectively construct. The word "perished," psychological distance from direct causation. The phrase "shortly after she was taken," temporal proximity indicating the writer was present or nearly present. The buried in nature, geographic imprecision combined with settled finality. The not intentional, thus acknowledgement of culpability combined with mitigation of intent. The truly sorry, performed emotional authenticity. Each of these linguistic choices tells investigators something about the writer, their education level, their emotional relationship to the crime, their specific psychological distance from direct responsibility, and their awareness of how they want to be perceived by whoever receives the note. The FBI has had this note since February. They have had 145 days to apply the full resources of their forensic linguistics unit to these specific word choices. Whatever the behavioral profile that analysis has produced, whatever combination of demographic characteristics, educational background, emotional profile, and geographic connection the language implies, that profile has been guiding the investigation since February. Now let's address the specific significance of the note being released now, because CNN's John Miller made a specific point about why the decision was made to no longer hold the contents. He said, "This coming out now, they think it may stir the pot." Because one human tip from someone who actually knows could advance the case a lot faster than what they're doing right now. One human tip from someone who actually knows. The investigation has 50,000 tips in the file, but the specific tip that breaks the case, the person who saw something, heard something, knows something about a local man who changed his behavior in early February, who left a job or a relationship or the Tucson area in the days after Nancy disappeared, that specific tip may not have arrived yet. And the disclosure of the note's contents, buried in nature, perished shortly after.
"We are truly sorry," may be the specific piece of information that causes someone who knows something to recognize what they know. The person who prepared a hole in the desert may have told someone. The person who was acting strangely in early February may have told someone. The person with the information the investigation needs may not have called 1-800-CALL-FBI because they did not connect what they know to the case.
But if the note's contents are public, if she is buried in nature now is the phrase circulating on every news network, someone who knows a person who dug something in the desert in early February may call. One human tip from someone who actually knows. That is why the note's contents are public now. The investigation needs that tip. The forensic processes are running, DNA, blockchain, genealogy, but they take time. The specific tip that a human being who witnessed something in early February might provide could cut the timeline dramatically. And Savannah Guthrie stood on the Today Show on June 23rd and said, "Please do the right thing for our family, for our children." She knows about the note, she has known since February, and she is still asking. The investigation has known for 145 days. Now the public knows, and the person who actually knows, whoever saw something, heard something, noticed something in the days after February 1st, may now recognize what they know and call Day 145. The note was held to protect the interrogation. It was released to stir the pot. The criminal profiler says two personalities, possibly two people. The former FBI agent says the language is psychologically revealing. The investigation still has no named suspect, but one human tip could change everything. Let me go deeper into the specific investigative logic of why releasing the note's contents now, after 145 days of holding them, is itself a significant tactical decision. Because the timing of this disclosure is not accidental. The CNN reporting was explicit. Now, investigators believe the widespread revelation of the second note's contents could reignite more tips in a case that has drawn national attention. The investigation made this decision, not the news organizations. The news organizations agreed to hold the information at the request of law enforcement and the family. When the investigation decided the calculus had changed, when the specific reasons for holding the information were outweighed by the benefit of releasing it, the hold was lifted. What changed the calculus? The three original reasons for holding the note were verification, tip volume protection, and interrogation value. Each of those reasons has a limited shelf life. Verification is no longer the constraint it was in February. The investigation has had 145 days to process and assess the notes. The specific determination, both notes believed to be from the actual kidnappers, has been made. The authentication process is complete. The reason to hold the information pending authentication no longer applies. Tip volume protection has become more complex. In February, the concern was that revealing Nancy's likely death would reduce the volume of active search tips. 5 months later, the tip volume has already slowed. CNN sources confirmed that the number of public tips has slowed. The specific risk of reducing an already reduced tip volume is less significant than the potential benefit of the note's specific contents producing the one human tip that advances the case. Interrogation value is the most interesting constraint to analyze. The logic was, keep the note's contents private so that a suspect in custody cannot have learned them from public reporting. But 5 months in, with no named suspect and no person of interest, the interrogation scenario that the withholding was protecting has not materialized. If it had, if a suspect had been questioned about the note's contents, the information would have served its purpose and could then be released. The fact that it has been held for 145 days without serving its interrogation purpose is itself a signal about the state of the investigation. No one has been in the room where investigators could ask, "What did the second note say?" All three constraints have weakened or changed, and the benefit side, one human tip from someone who actually knows, has remained constant. The calculation shifted. The note's contents went public. Now let's also address the specific disclosure that there were multiple notes received, many of which were deemed illegitimate. Because this context is essential to understanding the significance of the two that were considered authentic. In the early days after Nancy's disappearance, multiple ransom notes were received by multiple media outlets, including those sent to a local Tucson media station and to TMZ. Many of these notes were deemed illegitimate by authorities. This is a standard feature of high-profile kidnapping cases. The public engagement that a nationally covered disappearance produces includes people who send fraudulent communications for a range of reasons, from seeking attention to attempting to collect reward money to simple malicious behavior. The specific determination that two notes were believed legitimate is the investigative assessment that distinguished these two from the noise. The factors that made them credible were specific. They came from a secure server that obscured but did not eliminate the common methodology. They contained specific details about what Nancy was wearing that only the perpetrator would know. And they were consistent in their escalation. First a ransom demand, then a disclosure of death. This pattern, a ransom demand followed by a death disclosure, is the specific sequence of a genuine kidnapping that went wrong. A fraudulent note writer typically maintains the fiction of a living hostage because a living hostage is the leverage that produces payment. Only the actual perpetrator, who knows the hostage is dead and can no longer maintain the ransom fiction, would send a second note disclosing the death. The specific logic of the note sequence is itself an authentication argument, and it is the argument that distinguished these two notes from the many that were deemed fraudulent. Now let me address the specific significance of Savannah's February 7th video in the context of what we now know, because the video, in which she said "we received your message and we understand," has been recontextualized by the disclosure of the second note's contents. "We received your message. The message said she is buried in nature now. We understand. We understand that she is dead. We understand what the note is telling us. And then, we beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace." Savannah was asking for Nancy's body. Not for Nancy's rescue, not for the ransom process to continue with a living hostage, for her mother's body. So the family could celebrate with her, meaning so they could have a funeral, a burial, a proper goodbye, so they could have peace. The specific language of that February 7th video, which the country watched without knowing the context of the second note, now reads differently. "This is the only way we will have peace" is not the language of someone hoping for a living mother's return. It is the language of someone who has been told their mother is buried somewhere and is asking the person who buried her to tell them where. This is the only way we will have peace, because the alternative is not knowing where Nancy is buried. Not knowing whether she is in the Sonoran Desert or in Mexico or somewhere else. Not knowing whether the buried in nature is the Catalina foothills or the Mariposa region or somewhere that no search team has yet identified. Savannah knows about the note. She has known since February. She responded to it on February 7th with language that, in context, is unmistakably a request for Nancy's body rather than Nancy's rescue. And she has been going to work every morning for 145 days, wearing yellow, keeping the story alive, asking for one human tip from someone who actually knows. Now let's also look at what CNN's John Miller said about where the investigation actually stands. Because his sourcing inside federal law enforcement is the most reliable public window into the actual state of the case. He said law enforcement officials, both local and federal, still have no main suspect, nor any particular person of interest. No main suspect. No person of interest. After 145 days. With DNA at Quantico. With blockchain analytics. With genealogy at Astrea. With 50,000 tips. With the enhanced images that Coffindaffer says exist and have not been released. The investigation has material. It is still looking through thousands of hours of video. It is analyzing DNA. It is following up on leads. But the specific threshold, a named suspect, a person of interest, has not been crossed. The note's public disclosure is the investigation's response to not having crossed that threshold after 145 days. The forensic processes are running, but they take time. The specific tip that a human being who knows something might provide, the tip that one person who witnessed the right moment in early February might call in after recognizing what the note says, is faster. One human tip. That is what the investigation needs, and the note's public disclosure is the attempt to generate it. No main suspect. No person of interest. The note is now public. Day 145. She is buried in nature now. The investigation knows. The public knows. And one person who actually knows where that nature is, who saw something, heard something, knows someone whose behavior changed in early February, may now call. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, 1-800-225-5324. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward is over $1.2 million, completely anonymous. We will be back tomorrow.